Hi guys. So as promised, I'm going through my tyres ready for the upcoming GT12 Cup round at the LMP National at Eastbourne, and getting ready for the club racing I've been doing. So I thought I'd go through tyre theory a little bit. Now, this is a really controversial subject. There are as many opinions as there are people. In fact, if you asked 6 GT12 racers what their opinions on tyres were, you'd probably get 7 opinions back. However, this is my theory. This is sort of what I've learned and my opinions only. Okay, guys? But hopefully this will help clarify a few things for people and help a few people out, because it's it's probably the hardest part about GT12 to learn. And hopefully this can help some people move forward. So first of all, I'm going to grab some bits of paper and some pretty pictures. Please excuse my drawing. So first of all, we have several different types of tyre. There are two major manufacturers of tyre. There's JFT, or Japan Foam Tyre, and Contact, who are distributed by Schumacher. JFT is distributed by Zen Racing. Now, originally, both of them started out with A foam, which they look like black wheels, but basically it's quite a dense foam. It's quite, I mean, the compounds, they say it's more of a natural rubber. I don't understand all that, frankly. It's a very dense foam. It's quite hard wearing. It doesn't offer as much grip as some of the later tyre types, but it's good for it does work. Sometimes if you're running them a lot on one night, it can sort of go what we call gummy, and that's where the surface of the tyre stops being it starts to go kind of tacky, and that's where it all gets very inconsistent to drive and quite difficult to drive. And so some of the later tyres deal with that better, but it's basically the additive reacts with the tyre and makes it go soft, so that can happen. The later tyres, you have Q foam from Contact, and S foam from JFT came out. For those who run JFT, S foam is basically what they run. Very few people run A foam anymore. Contact, some people run Q foam, most people run T foam, which came out slightly later. T foam, so this is S foam. The problem is to look at them. They all look roughly similar because they're all black. But there you go. And then these ones at the back here are T foam. To compare the two, I've run Contact A foam, I've run Contact Q foam, I've never run T foam. This is going to be my first experience with it. Excuse me. But the T foam seems like, again, a very dense rubber, but slightly different to S foam. But both apparently offer much more grip, so it'll be much more direct and much more fun to drive and much faster, but at the cost of increased wear. So where on A foam, a run would use maybe 0.1 or 0.2 of a mil off the tyre, S foam will use between 0.3 and 0.5 mil a run. Q foam was using about the same. T foam apparently is slightly better on the wear than Q foam, but I hear so much each way on that I don't really know. And well, I'll find out and let you know. Contact also have a Team Bomber tyre, which I've never used and I don't know anything about, but allegedly offers the best grip in the world, but at the consequence of much increased wear. So if you're absolutely after speed, that might be what you want. And your tyre choice basically comes down to how you want that equation to work, and that's it. At national level, and actually I personally run at club, I run S35 at club and S35 at nationals, partly because I want to practice how my car handles as it would at a national at club, and partly because I have a few tricks to make them last a bit longer, so it's not quite so bad for me with the wear. I gather at nationals most people who use Contact tyres are using T foam 35s, which is what I've bought. But yeah, I'm sure some of the Schumacher guys will comment and inform everyone if I'm wrong about that. So the next little diagram I've got here is this balance, which is just a bit of a laugh, but it essentially it sums it all up. For me, it's all about balance between the life of the tyre and the risk of chunking. Chunking is what happens when it looks like this. As you can see, there's little nibbles out of the edge of the tyre. Now that basically makes the tyre very inconsistent to drive on, and that can happen. The risk of that happening increases with the diameter. So if you run a very big tyre like this, it's more likely to chunk than something very small, like, well, yeah, than that, okay? So yeah, you have to balance that. Conversely, the bigger the tyre, the more physical rubber there is, the longer it will last on the wear rate. You know, you'll get more rounds. If you're taking out 0.5 mil a run, 2 runs per millimetre, you know, very quickly, you know, 46 millimetres down to 40 millimetres is not that many runs. So you have to balance that between you. So that's that. There's also a cost element, but frankly, they're all quite cheap. So going to go with that. So this is how I see what happens with chunky. So if you imagine this is a wheel, right, but end on like that. So that's your rim, and then that's the tyre above it, okay? So there's several things going on. So if I start at the bottom here, if you have a very square tyre and you haven't rounded off the corners, what happens is under load, the top surface that's against the carpet gets sort of pushed over by the loads, because the wheel's trying to push over this way. And it sort of does this. And after a point, this edge and this edge are prone to chunking because they've got no support, right? So there's nothing underneath sticking that to the wheel. So after a point, the forces will get so big that chunks, and it starts to lift underneath and things like that. So that's what I think you know, in my opinion, that's what causes it. That can be alleviated a little bit by rounding the profile of your tyre. You do lose ultimate bite, and the car feels less aggressive like this. But as this top surface, instead of the top surface dragging the rest of the tyre over, the top surface can sort of compress into this round section, and you end up with this edge having a lot more support. But you do lose grip on this side. I mean, this has more grip than that, but this is a little bit less likely to chunk. Finally, on chunking, my top diagram like this. So if you imagine that's a full tyre, that's quite a big tyre that represents, and then it chunks. So that takes a big nibble, and that's kind of the profile they look like out of the sidewall. Now that's quite a big deal. You know, that quite affects the surface. If you imagine the surface of the tyre, you know, that's reduced by quite a large amount. So that where that chunk is, there will be a lot less grip on that section of tyre. So that's where the inconsistent handling comes from. Now, one of the things I've done quite a lot, because I'm cheap, is I true them down. When they chunk like that and it's quite serious, I true them down and I reduce this diameter down. Okay, and then it starts to look like this one on the right. And if you sort of see that the chunk's still there, but it's less of a big deal. And in fact, you know, if you, I'll show you some tyres I've done that to, and I carry on running them because, yeah, okay, they're probably not your best tyres to pick for a national event, but they're perfectly good for club racing. And well, I mean, I've even been racing them at Quicks because I haven't really been able to buy any new tyres just yet. And so I've managed with what I've got, okay? And it's just a way of taking a tyre that otherwise you'd probably put in the bin and getting 2, 3, 4 more runs out of it. You know, and it does work. So, right. Okay. So, enough of the pictures for a minute. If I look at these tyres, okay, I bought last year and they have done my entire national season and some club racing. So they've done 6 national meetings. 6 rounds of nationals, sorry. So 3 meetings, but 2 days. And they have done most of my club racing pretty much every week that I've done. So they've done quite a few runs now, probably getting towards 12. Yeah, I'd say 12 to 15 runs, probably a bit more. I start off at 44 millimeters of wear. Sorry, 45 millimeters of diameter is where I start, and I've just sort of gradually worn them down to this. As you can see, there's not much left on those fronts, and in fact, these are where I'm stopping because some of them have got to the stage. Let me see if I can find one for you. Yeah, here we are. So this one, if you look, it's actually hit this point where it's starting to actually peel away from the edge completely, and at that point I tend to find that I lose all steering. So I could carry on, but I'm not going to get anywhere, so I just don't bother. At that point I throw them in, and it does mean that there's some left, there's some meat left on the rears, but I'll come to that in a minute. But yeah, when it comes to tyres, your maintenance is key. Okay, if you want them to last, you have to look after them. So that means after every meeting, you have to go through and grab your tire. I mean, this one's chunked, but I'll show you what I'm doing. And basically, you can see, you grab it and you try and peel it back with your thumb, and there you go. You can see. In fact, that's really good because the glue aids you in looking. So you can see it peels back. Can you see that? Okay, now what that will become is more chunking. In fact, here we are, even better. Can you see there's that line here underneath the foam where the glue is peeled back. Now that's the surface of the tyre has been pushed like this, like I'm doing with my thumb as it's under load around the circuit, and it's begun to peel that glue. So what you have to do is put a tiny bit of glue underneath and just massage it in and get it so that that's back down, and that will prevent it chunking further. And in fact, that's what I've done on this one quite a bit, as you can see from the glue residue there, and it's lasted much longer than it would have done otherwise as a result. Okay, the other thing that some people do is put a very thin coat of super glue, particularly on the fronts. I haven't got any like it anymore because they've all been trued down beyond that now. But they put a light coating of super glue just around the side wall, just so that it has a little bit more structure to it on that very edge where the steering is happening, because the tyre's under a bit of load there. Right. The last thing to consider is tyre diameters. Now I've got another diagram, I'm afraid, on that. Here we are. So if you imagine this, let's concentrate on the bottom first. So a smaller tyre has less ultimate grip than a bigger one. And the reason for this is, if you imagine they're all the same squishiness, when they're on the ground and they've got some weight on them, they squidge down slightly. Now this diagram is massively exaggerated and quite crude, frankly, for which I apologise. But essentially it squidges down, and your contact patch is the bit of rubber that's on the carpet, right? And yes, the carpet gives a little bit as well, but I'm trying to make a point. So in a small tyre, it can't squidge as much, and you end up with basically a smaller bit before it starts to peel away from the carpet as it's rolling along. So you end up with a contact patch that's quite small. And a larger tyre, because it's got more to squidge down and it's effectively softer, because if you think about the tyre as a layer, as lots of layers of foam, there's more layers, and there's more layers supported by foam than there would be supported by tyre, like an actual wheel, if you see what I mean. So you end up with this quite a lot larger contact patch, and so this tyre here will have more ultimate grip than this tyre. Okay, now that comes into play when you're dealing with low grip situations. We had an interesting situation last year at Quicks XRS. The haul was, through no fault of the club or the venue, it got very cold, and those first few rounds in the morning were incredibly low grip, really quite difficult to drive. We were also racing. We were racing on A foam, which is, by the by, that wasn't the problem really. The problem was the fact that the carpet was so cold. We had low grip, and actually I ended up running my tyres pretty much out the packet at 46mm on my rears, because I knew that I would have ultimately that would have more grip, and as a result I was able to push harder than other people's, and I did quite well in those meetings, in particularly given some of the people getting to 2 minutes or so and running into difficulties with their cars beginning to swap ends, and I'm still got a safe car and I'm able to push. It's surprising how much ground you can make up. Which brings me to our next point. So if you imagine this is the front wheels and rear wheels, hence F and R, okay, the difference between, which ties in with this, the difference between your front and rear wheels is called stagger, okay. You always run a rear wheel bigger than a front wheel, okay, otherwise it's just, quite frankly, it's horrible to drive. LMPs have this too. They normally run a rear wheel between 0.5 mil and 1.5 mil, but normally around 1 mil bigger than the rear than the front. Now that's called a stagger of 0.5 to 1.5 mil. What this means is, especially in GT12, where the front and rear tyres are the same width, is that the contact patch and your grip on the rear tyre is more than the grips on the front tyre. Especially when, even if you additive them the same, if you put full additive on both. Which means you have a grip bias towards the rear. If you reduce that stagger, you will move the grip relatively towards the front of the car, which gives you a more twitchy car. If you want a very safe car, you up your stagger. Now most GT12s, I work personally with a stagger between 2 and 2.5 mil, sometimes more. In that aforementioned situation, I was at nearly 3 mil of stagger, and it worked. But you can use that, is my point. You can use that to tune how you want your car to behave and how safe you want it to be. It may not be the fastest doing that, but it will be more fun to drive. I find it frustrating when the car's always swapping ends on me, so you can use that to tune that out. Okay, it's also worth bearing in mind that as your tyres get smaller, they will have less contact patch and thus less ultimate grip, all other things being equal. So hence, sometimes if you get really small, your club night might be a bit trickier. But sometimes at nationals, where you've got more cars going around, you can end up in situations where you have too much grip and you're trying to take grip out, at which point your small tyres can become really useful again. So there's that. Lastly, and I should probably have covered this more towards the beginning really, in addition to your foam type that you got here, you also have Shore, which is, it's actually a proper unit measurement. It's like an official scientific measurement, but essentially it boils down to how squidgy the foam is. Okay, now 35 Shore is pretty much standard, but if you compare, say, 40 Shore, so this is a 40 Shore tyre here, and where's my 35 gone? So, and that's a 35 Shore tyre there. If you compare the squidginess of this, it feels really firm, compared to this. This has got some sort of squidge to it, whereas this has got less. There's still some, but it's less. So this comes back in to, what I'm saying with this little picture. The squidgier your foam, all other things being equal, if these were the same size, the squidgier the foam, the more it's going to sink in and the bigger your contact patch and the ultimate grip you've got. But it comes at a price. We've got that balance again, because the squidgier the foam, the more likely it is to result in a chunk if things go wrong. So it's worth doing that. But as I say, these are all things you have to consider, but in practice Most people who are running JFT tyres are running the S35, and most people who are running T-foam, from as I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong, are running the T35. Okay, and yeah, that's basically everything that... And finally, last thing, when you're running, you'll find all kinds of things on your tyres afterwards. I've not cleaned these off at all, as you can tell. So here, you've got this white dust. This is what happens when you run on ETS, and it's still got some of the glue left in from when it was new. Basically, they have a protective sheet on that's got some sticky glue on, and that results in this. It doesn't do much harm. If you get lots of it on, it starts to kill the grip a little bit, but not a huge amount. But yeah, it can just be cleaned off, wiped off, brushed off, you know, and then the re-additive go through. If you're reusing tyres and it's like this, it's sometimes worth taking some masking tape and just rolling it over, and then it comes up looking nice and black, you know, like that again, and then you know you're not going to have that problem because it does compound itself. The other thing has proved fairly controversial recently. There's been a post on Facebook about it. You occasionally get this fluff clinging to your tyres. If you get enough of it, it does sort of get between the tyre and the carpet, and it works like a bit of a having an oil underneath your tyres. It does remove grip, but in practice, I've not had too much trouble with it. It's just weird fluff. I found the best way to combat that is to make sure that you additive for long enough so that the tyre's got enough grip to cope with it, and if you go out with your tyre slightly damper than you might think was appropriate, it seems to pick up less fluff that way. Yep, that's about it. Yes, right. Last couple of things. If you're doing tyres, first of all, get one of those. That is a vernier caliper. They come in digital form as well, which are really easier to read, but quite frankly, I had one of those and I got annoyed with it, kept on running on a battery, so I just learnt to read it. And how it works is, you have the two scales, you measure your diameter, and then you essentially read off the first number, so that's 14 off the 0 bit, and then you run through and you see which one of these lines up with the one above it best. So in this case, that's probably a 7. You can see that. So that becomes 14.7 mil, and then you've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 underneath it, and it doesn't take long to get used to reading it, and it never runs out of battery. Really useful. And finally, additive. Now, there's lots of additives out there. Some of them work better than others. I have found ones that work well on foam for GT12. SXT3 works well. Spider Grip Blue works well for GT12. I prefer Spider Grip Blue over SXT3, admit. And I normally run, on a club night, I will run as much time as I can get on the rears, all the way across, much time as I can get. And then I will normally try and get, so as I'm coming up to my race, 2 heats before I need to go out, I will get the front and I will do the inside half, and then 1 heat before we go out, I will remove it off both of them. If it's a particularly hectic night and there's only 4 heats or something, I will occasionally, as I'm putting the fronts on, once I've done the fronts, I will put again on the rears just to try and get as much in there as possible, because I've only done it for 10 minutes and I'll really need to get back out. That's one of the things that you just need to get used to and learn. Unfortunately, additive timing is it's a science and it's an art, and there's lots and lots of different opinions on it. But in general, more time on your rear than on your front. Half additive on the front, or 3/4 additive on your front, full additive on your rear, and you what you can start playing with timings and see what the effect that has on the car. Yeah, that's basically it. Hopefully that helps you guys, and hopefully that means that a few people will have a bit of an easier time with it when learning this stuff, because I know for the first 6 months it took me a little while to get used to the idea and used to it, and I went through a lot of tyres through going, oh no, I'll make them really big and then I'll have lots of life in them, and then you chunk them the first time you go out and go, oh well, those are no good anymore. That didn't last long. But if if you're prepared to true down to a size where you're not going to chunk them, and it takes a little bit of experience to find that size, but I would suggest 45 or 44 mil to start. You'll find you'll get much more life out of them, conversely, than what you expect. So anyway, right, thanks very much guys, and see you in a bit.